Hi, I'm Andras Fekete, your host for East Brunswick Television. I'm here with Angus Kress Gillespie of East Brunswick, New Jersey. Angus is a recognized authority on the topic of the Jersey Devil. He has published significant work in this subject area based on his own field work in the Pine Barrens of South Jersey. His research traces how this once local legend has become widespread through popular culture. Angus is here to tell us all about the legend. It is my pleasure to welcome him to our studio today. We're going to talk about the Pine Barrens, and in particular, one of the interesting monsters of the Pine Barrens called the New Jersey Devil. So I'm going to ask some questions, and because this is really an interesting topic, and I'm not used to talking about devils, but we're going to do this for a little bit. You know, what is the New Jersey Devil, and what does it look like?
That's a good question. It's a traditional story. It's passed on father to son, mother to daughter, generation after generation. Pretty much got started in the 1730s.
Oh,
it's been around a long time.
Wow.
And the traditional description is that this is a creature with the head of a horse, the torso of a man, the wings of a bat, the feet of a goat, and a long serpentine tail. That's the traditional description of this creature, which has been in the Pine Barrens of South Jersey for more than the last 250 years.
Interesting. Is there any explanation in myth or wherever, how did those body parts get together? Who fabricated this thing?
Yeah.
It's a very unusual collection of animal parts.
Yeah. I believe that physical description really came to the Anglo-Celtic settlers in South Jersey because we had similar monster descriptions in England in the 1640s.
Okay.
So I think that perhaps the people in the Pines saw something strange and unusual and frightening, and they drew upon their traditional legends to come up with the description.
Well, that's fascinating. So it may be an imported idea, in fact.
Yes.
Interesting. Well, let me ask, are there any other states that have monsters like this? Or is New Jersey unique in the USA for having sort of legendary monster?
Well, that's a good question. Traditionally, this was a hyper-local creature.
Okay.
It was called the Leeds Devil, and this was in the vicinity of the Mullica River, all the way in South Jersey, in what is now Atlantic County. And this goes back a long way.
All right. Well, then, what inspired you to delve into this character? I mean, it's.
Well, when I originally came to Rutgers as a junior professor in the early 1970s, and I was recruited in part because I was in an American Studies department, and they already had coverage for history and literature, but they wanted coverage for folklore.
Okay.
So I was teaching introductory courses in folklore, and I figured because this is a New Jersey audience, I would try to look for New Jersey examples.
Very good.
And it was the students from South Jersey who put me on to this story.
Well, go South Jersey. That's great. Well, we covered this a little bit earlier, but is the devil purely folklore, or has there been any empirical evidence at all where somebody saw something and said, there it is? Any documented empirical evidence of its, quote, existence?
Well, in folklore, we talk about these monster stories. They under the classification of legend.
Okay.
And these legendary stories always invoke belief, so that the way our minds are wired, when we hear a story like the story of the Jersey Devil, our minds are set up in such a way that we, depending on who we are, we tend to accept it or reject it.
Okay.
It's by its very nature, it has to do with belief. Okay. Now, for me as a folklorist, what I try to do is to keep an open mind, which is very difficult because it's tempting to go one way or the other. But there have been many sightings, some of them by reputable people, sheriffs, ministers, rabbis, priests, reliable people in the community who really believe what they saw. And some of these are even corroborated where multiple witnesses saw it. But a sighting doesn't really constitute proof.
Right.
So the idea is there proof that the Jersey Devil exists? No. It's a matter of belief because it's a legend.
I get it.
But one of the interesting things I do with my students, they say, does the Jersey Devil exist? Well, we have no proof that it does exist. But then I'm very fond of asking them, how would you go about proving that it does not exist?
There you go.
And that's a basic question from Philosophy 101. It really can't be done.
Yeah, you got him. That's interesting. That's an interesting point of view. Well, we talked about the folklore thing. Now, here, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of researchers. I'm not a research person, but read a little bit. But what inspired you? What sources? How do you collect your information? Because a lot of this is legend, some of it is documentation. But what was your method of collecting the information?
That's a good question. I mean, for literary historians, you spend a lot of time in the library reading literary classics. Historians spend a lot of time in the library reading documents and provable accounts. The best method, I believe, for a folklorist is field work. You got to get down in the Pine Barrens and talk to people and find out what their accounts are. Now, typically, you don't get a full-blown story. You get a little snippet here and there.
Interesting.
For example, if I'm sharing the story with you, I can put it together. It goes something like, someday in the late fall, when you're walking through the pines, listen carefully as the wind comes off the ocean through the pines.
Okay. Ooh. There you go.
It almost seems like the wind is trying to tell us something.
Okay.
Possibly someone's name. Oh, Mother Leeds. Oh, Mother Leeds. It seems that Jane Leeds and her husband Daniel, they lived in a cabin along a swamp near the Mullica River in South Jersey. And folks in those parts said it was a strange family, an unusual family. Well, we do know that it was an unusually large family. Jane Leeds and Daniel Leeds, they had 12 children. And some people said Jane Leeds was even a witch, but in any event, the deal was Daniel Leeds, he was a good hunter, he was a good fisherman, he was a good gardener. There was always food on the table. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that Jane Leeds was pretty much responsible for all the child care, the cooking, the cleaning, picking things up, putting things away, taking care of 12 kids. She was really at her wit's end. And then one terrible night, she was saying her bedtime prayers, and in a moment of understandable weakness, she said, Lord, let this one not be a child, let this one be a devil. Well, we now know that that was a mistake, because on that terrible winter night in 1735, when Mother Leeds' 13th child was born, it started out, it was a perfectly normal little baby boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, but then in a space of less than 20 minutes, it grew to the size of two full-grown men, and in the place of the little baby face, there was a horrible head of the horse.
Wow.
A massive creature with the wings of a bat and the feet of a goat and a long serpentine tail. It had these massive arms covered with fur. At the end of each arm was a furry paw. At the end of each paw were long bony fingers with razor-sharp fingernails. And then, unexpectedly, with one swipe of his right arm, the creature slit the throat of the midwife and attendants, who collapsed in a pool of blood. The creature gave out a blood-curdling scream and escaped out the chimney, where he's terrified the people of South Jersey for 250 years. Now, if you're ever in the woods late at night and you hear the sudden crack of a twig, beware. Beware of the Jersey Devil.
Okay, so and you want to camp down in South Jersey, you have to be aware of what's going on. If you hear those noises at night.
That's a coherent story, but I think nobody's ever told it to me quite that way.
I understand.
I had to piece it together from what people said.
Well, that's good. It's like a detective thing. You get the evidence and you start pasting it together, and there's your story. That's fabulous. What about the fieldwork of Herbert Halpert in the 1930s? How was that contributing to the?
Herbert Halpert was an amazing guy. He was a student at NYU. And he, for his dissertation, he collected something like 200 different versions of the story, which is highly acceptable folkloristic practice. He would get word for word what informant one said, word for word. We would have the name, the address, the age, the date, and this is a first-class piece of folkloristic research. We have all these stories and story fragments, and it filled like 2 or 3 thick volumes. It was amazing, and I remember speaking with him back in the 1980s, and what I was urging him to do was to boil it down and select a few as a publishable book, because it was unmanageable. There was so much data there. But he was an academic purist, and he refused to do that. And as a result, his wonderful work kind of languishes in the research archives of major libraries. It never got published as a book.
Okay, that's fascinating. It's almost like the encyclopedia of knowledge, rather than popular reading.
I admired his work, but
raw data. All right.
It's academically respectable, but it never got publishable.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's see. How about this? There's some houses down there that are interesting. And says, what notable experience do you have about the South Jersey New Gretna house? There's something interesting about that house.
It's a funny thing. I spent a lot of time in the Pine Barrens talking to the Pineys about their experiences. And then every once in a while I stop off at a place like New Gretna House, which is a tavern, a bar, at the end of a long day of collecting stories.
Yes.
And I'm at the bar and I order a drink, and then I looked over to my side, and on the wall there was an oil painting of the Jersey Devil at the New Gretna House. And so I walked over and I looked carefully at the painting, and there was no signature on the painting. So I asked the bartender, I said, I don't see any signature. Who painted that? Bartender said, it's a self-portrait. I think I was set up for that.
Uh-oh. Okay. All right, so we got the New Gretna house. Now, what happened in 1909 in South Jersey and Philadelphia in 1909 that was relevant to the New Jersey Devil?
That's a very good question. It was in January of 1909.
Okay.
in Burlington County, which is right across the Delaware River from Philadelphia.
Right.
And today, Burlington County, next to Philadelphia, that's largely a suburban place. But back in 1909, these were Pineys, this was farm country. And because it was January and there was snow in the ground, there were reports of huge tracks in the snow. So, understandably, these tracks were attributed to the Jersey Devil. Well, word got across the river to Philadelphia,
Right.
and there were about 6 or 7 daily newspapers all competing, and they jumped onto this story. And this is before you had photographs in the newspapers.
Okay.
And so these Philadelphia newspapers, they would send teams with a reporter and an illustrator, an artist.
Okay,
And
yeah.
so they would go and they would interview the Pineys and write up what they were told, and then the illustrator would provide a drawing. Well, so far so good, but there was a problem. These city slicker reporters and artists, they weren't taking the testimony of these Pineys very seriously. And it ended up that the drawings were kind of comical. They would show, for example, a Jersey Devil wearing a top hat and smoking a cigar, or a Jersey Devil holding an umbrella and reading newspaper accounts about himself as if he was a publicity hound. Well, that's amusing, it's entertaining, but the Pineys, they aren't stupid, they read newspapers too, and they reached the conclusion, he said, these city slicker, they're not taking us seriously. They're mocking us. They're making fun of us. Well, guess what? From now on, we're never going to talk to outsiders about our deep beliefs anymore. We don't want to be ridiculed. That's 1909. Now, I come along some 60 years later. I encountered the same problem.
Oh, boy.
Nobody wants to talk to me.
Wow.
I'm an outsider. I'm from Exit 9. I'm from New Brunswick,
Right.
too far north.
Yeah.
But I caught on very quickly, and the technique I developed was when I was reaching out to the Pineys, I would try to find topics of mutual interest. One of them was the music. I was very interested in traditional music of South Jersey, and I met a lot of musicians. We'd talk about the music, and maybe the chat would get around to the hunting, the fishing, the gardening, the boating, the weather, neutral topics. Only when I felt that I'd really established rapport, I might gradually say that I was interested in the old songs and stories of this area.
Okay.
And then gradually, if I felt that they were trusting me, I might mention the Jersey Devil.
Nice.
But I had to overcome
Right.
this fear of outsiders.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I guess they call it establishing rapport.
Establish and trust. Yeah. Very, 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 very good. Okay, let's see. How about the 1970s? Relatively recently, are there new developments or key developments that happened regarding the Jersey Devil?
I think one of the key developments was this book, The Jersey Devil by McCloy and Miller. If I'm not mistaken, it came out in 1976.
Okay.
And it's not an academic book. It's only about 121 pages. It has large type and wide margins. But it's readable and it's reasonably accurate. It's not an academic book. It doesn't reflect any folkloristic training, but I don't find any mistakes per se. It's a readable account, and that helped to bring it to the attention of people.
Okay. Well, there's something. Has the name of the creature changed at all, or what people call them, locally or otherwise elsewhere? Has there been any kind of a different name evolving?
Yeah.
As time went on.
I think what happened was originally it was a very local story. It was the Leeds Devil. Gradually over time, people started referring it to as the Jersey Devil.
Oh, okay.
And that was a major shift because then it gave a sort of statewide recognition. And indeed, in 1939, the New Jersey State Legislature made the Jersey Devil the official state monster. And it's kind of interesting. Every state, it seems, has a state flower, a state bird, a state tree. But we are the only state with an official state demon. And when you think about it, that was an easy thing for the legislature to do. It doesn't cost any money.
There you go.
There's no appropriation needed.
Interesting.
And indeed, there is physical evidence for it. If you're ever in Trenton and you go to the lower house, the speaker's podium, on the front of it, in wood, is a carving of the face of the Jersey Devil. So it has this sort of quasi-official status.
Wow, that's interesting. Let's see. We talked about gathering information in the beginning.
Yeah.
And when we talked about your fieldwork, your research, so on, and there were books that were published. Were there other information that you came across from people like I think a book called The Piney or something by Joe King, Gladys Ear, I think is how you spell it.
These were
Forked River, or Merce Ridgeway from Waretown, people like that.
Yeah, those are good examples. For example, Merce Ridgeway, he was an accomplished guitar player whom I'd had frequently at the folk festival. And he made his living being a clam fisherman in Barnegat Bay. And we had good rapport, and I finally got around to asking about the Jersey Devil. And he had an interesting story. It seems like he was about 10 years old, and he had gone to bed, and his parents were still awake downstairs in the living room. At one point, he gets up, he comes down the stairway, and he overhears his parents talking, and they're recalling a sighting of the Jersey Devil. That's a fragmentary story, but it's kind of compelling that the story is being passed on to the next generation. Another Piney I talked to, Joe King, he recounted the story of a friend of his had sighted the Jersey Devil, and he was so traumatized that he came home and he couldn't speak, he couldn't talk about it. So that's a fragment, but it's convincing. Gladys Eyre, who was from Waretown, she was a banjo player and a traditional singer. She told a story that back in the early 19th century, the Pineys were aware of pirate activity in the Atlantic Ocean, and they employed trickery. They would bring a haystack to the shore, light it on fire to confuse the pirates who might think it was the Barnegat Light and it'd be safe to sail. They would get too close to the shore, their ship would run aground, the Pineys would gang up on the pirates, kill all the pirates, and steal their treasure. Then perhaps they would bury the treasure in the pines and circulate the story that the treasure was guarded by the Jersey Devil to keep people away. So that's a pretty coherent story.
Yeah, you know, this kind of thing, I think there's a whole thing in New Jersey, New Jersey tourism. People are trying to attract, obviously, people to our beautiful state and see all the wonders. Has any effort been made to include this myth, if you would, as part of marketing New Jersey's interesting, tourism opportunities?
Yeah, in the town of Smithville, which is actually close to Leeds Point, even today you can find postcards and you can find T-shirts, souvenirs. There's even now Jersey Devil wine, even Jersey Devil beer.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a marketing ploy. It's become entered into popular culture. But there's a danger when things enter popular culture. I notice every October as we approach Halloween, there's a spike of interest in the Jersey Devil. And I'm kind of upset when I see contemporary newspaper accounts. They tend to go one of two ways. They tend to go towards humor, making fun of the story, or quasi-scientific, trying to disprove the story.
Right.
I'm not fond of either approach.
Yeah, I mean, why don't you just let it be, you know, right?
Yeah.
Let it stay as a folk theme. Okay, let's see. Here's an interesting thought. I mean, what is New Jersey's official state position on the New Jersey Devil? In terms of other New Jersey organizations, I'll just throw it out. For example, DEP. There's the State Historic Preservation Office.
That's a good question. The Pinelands Commission.
Right, there you go. There's another one, right.
Which is responsible for the Pinelands National Reserve. They have a visitor center which features a statue of the Jersey Devil. So it has sort of quasi-official recognition. It's so interesting that the Pinelands National Reserve, this got started, I believe it was 1978, under Governor Bryndon Byrne, and there was this movement towards preservation. But the thing is, the Pinelands being so close to Philadelphia and so close to New York, that land was pretty valuable. There was no way you could make it into a national park or a national forest. Instead, it's the Pinelands National Reserve.
Okay.
So we're not taking it away from private owners.
Right.
It's just
designation.
Largely restricted to 19th century uses.
Got it.
Cranberry farming, blueberry farming, cedar tree harvesting. But what's not allowed is an airport or a housing development.
Yeah, well, we've got a couple, and then we're very close to the end here, but what are some of the experiences of your students in American Studies involving the devil stories?
Yeah, in the 70s and 80s, one of the things I often did is, after introducing the topic of the Jersey Devil to my students, I would encourage them to go to the Pines and write their own term papers about the Jersey Devil. And what I found is, more often than not, they had the same rapport problems that I was describing earlier. And it was very hard for them to get full stories. So I didn't grade these papers on success or failure.
Got it.
I just tried to evaluate their attempt to get the story.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Do you believe in the devil?
I make a concerted effort to duck that question. What I try to say is, I keep an open mind.
Right.
I don't sway to belief or disbelief. I keep saying, let's just look at the evidence, and even better, let's look at the stories. The creature may or may not exist, but for sure, the traditional stories do exist.
Wonderful. Good. Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I learned a lot.
My pleasure.
And I feel like I should run down there and take a nice ride today. You know?
Okay.